November 21, 1915. The Weddell Sea, Antarctica. 10 p.m. The ship groans. Not the normal creaking of wood and rigging that sailors learn to ignore, but something different, something alive, something dying. Ernest Shackleton stands on the deck of the Endurance, watching the ice close in. For weeks, pack ice has been tightening around his ship like a fist. Now, in the Antarctic twilight, the pressure is becoming unbearable. The Endurance is a three-masted barkentine, 144 feet long, built specifically for polar exploration. Her hull is reinforced with Norwegian fir and American elm. She's designed to withstand ice pressure that would crush ordinary ships. But the Weddell Sea doesn't care about design specifications. The ice squeezes, the timbers scream, and Ernest Shackleton realizes with absolute clarity that his ship is going to die, and his expedition, the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition, meant to cross the entire Antarctic continent on foot, is over before it began. 28 men are aboard. They're hundreds of miles from the nearest land, 1,000 miles from the nearest human settlement. Winter is approaching. The sun will disappear for 4 months. Temperatures will drop to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. No one knows where they are. No radio powerful enough to reach civilization. No rescue coming. No backup plan. And in approximately 3 hours, the Endurance will be crushed to splinters. Shackleton calls his crew together on the ice. He doesn't sugarcoat it. Ship and stores have gone, so now we'll go home. 28 men look at him. They're standing on floating ice in the most hostile environment on Earth. Home is thousands of miles away across an ocean that kills ships. The nearest land, Elephant Island, is a barren rock 346 miles north. The nearest human settlement, a whaling station on South Georgia Island, is 800 miles beyond that across the worst ocean on the planet. They have 3 lifeboats, limited supplies, and no realistic hope of rescue. What happens over the next 497 days will become the greatest survival story ever told. Not because of the hardship, though the hardship is unimaginable. Not because of the distance traveled, though the distances are staggering. But because of what doesn't happen. Nobody dies. 28 men enter the ice. 22 months later, all 28 walk out alive. This is the story of how Ernest Shackleton kept that impossible promise, how leadership, preparation, and relentless optimism can overcome conditions designed to kill, and why 109 years later, business schools still teach Shackleton's decisions as the ultimate masterclass in crisis leadership. Ernest Shackleton was 40 years old when the Endurance sailed from London on August 1, 1914. He'd already been to Antarctica twice, once with Robert Falcon Scott, once leading his own expedition that came within 97 miles of the South Pole before turning back. That decision to turn back, to choose survival over glory, defined Shackleton's philosophy. He wasn't interested in dying heroically. He was interested in bringing his men home. The Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition was his grandest ambition, the first crossing of Antarctica on foot. 1,800 miles from the Weddell Sea to the Ross Sea, crossing the South Pole. Nobody had attempted it. Most thought it impossible. Shackleton advertised for crew with legendary honesty. Men wanted for hazardous journey, low wages, bitter cold, long hours of complete darkness, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in event of success. 5,000 men applied. He selected 27, plus himself, scientists, sailors, carpenters, a photographer, even a stowaway, 18-year-old Perce Blackborough, who hid aboard ship and was discovered after they'd sailed. Shackleton hired him as steward. The Endurance departed England just as World War I began. Shackleton offered to cancel the expedition and place ship and crew at the Navy's disposal. First Lord of the Admiralty Winston Churchill sent a one-word telegram: proceed. They sailed south through the Atlantic, stopped at South Georgia Island, the last outpost of civilization, and on December 5, 1914, entered the Weddell Sea. The plan was to land on the Antarctic coast, establish a base, and begin the crossing. But the pack ice that year was unusually heavy. By January 1915, the Endurance was trapped, frozen into the ice 85 miles from land. Shackleton wasn't immediately concerned. They'd wait for spring thaw, break free, continue to shore. Polar ships got trapped in ice regularly. It was an inconvenience, not a disaster. Except the ice didn't release them. Spring came, Antarctic spring, when temperatures rise to merely freezing, and the ice held firm. Summer came, still frozen. The Endurance drifted with the pack ice, a prisoner, moving slowly north and west at the mercy of ocean currents beneath the ice. Months passed. The men maintained routines, scientific observations, hunting seals for food, playing football on the ice. But Shackleton watched the ice. He saw how it moved, how pressure ridges formed where ice sheaths collided. He understood what was coming. On October 24, 1915, the ice began to squeeze in earnest. Pressure built. The Endurance's hull groaned under forces that exceeded her design limits. Timbers cracked. Water began seeping through the hull. Shackleton ordered the ship abandoned. The men moved supplies in the 3 lifeboats, James Caird, Dudley Docker, and Stancomb Wills, onto the ice. For 3 weeks, they camped beside the dying ship, watching her slowly disintegrate. The ice continued its relentless pressure. Masts snapped, deck planking buckled, the hull twisted. On November 21, 1915, the Endurance finally succumbed. The ice crushed through her hull. She listed, then slowly sank beneath the ice, disappearing into the black water below. The expedition was over. Survival began. Shackleton's first decision: march north toward land. They were camped on an ice floe, a floating platform of frozen ocean, approximately 346 miles from Paulet Island, where they knew there was an emergency cache of supplies left by a previous expedition. If they could reach it, they'd have food and shelter while waiting for summer whaling ships. The men loaded the 3 lifeboats onto sledges. Each boat weighed over a ton. They packed supplies, food, tents, sleeping bags, equipment. Then they began hauling everything across the ice. It was hell. Antarctic pack ice isn't flat. It's a chaos of pressure ridges, hummocks, and crevices. The men harnessed themselves to the boats and pulled. A few hundred yards exhausted them. They'd rest, then pull again. Progress was measured in feet, not miles. After 3 days, they'd covered 7 miles. Shackleton did the math. At this rate, reaching Paulet Island would take 300 days. They didn't have 300 days of food. He made a brutal decision. Stop marching, set up camp, wait for the ice to drift them closer to land, then try again. This might be the most important leadership decision of the entire expedition. Marching felt like progress. Sitting still felt like giving up. But Shackleton understood that exhausting his men on a futile march would kill them. Better to conserve strength and wait for better conditions. They established Ocean Camp on the ice. For the next 3 months, December 1915 to March 1916, they lived on a floating ice floe, drifting slowly north, hunting seals and penguins for food. Shackleton maintained discipline and routine. Daily schedules, tasks assigned, meals at regular times. He knew that boredom and despair were as dangerous as cold and hunger. Men needed purpose. He also made strategic decisions about morale. When supplies ran low and he had to reduce rations, Shackleton made sure the men saw him eating the same reduced portions. When the weakest crew members struggled, Shackleton gave him his own gloves, his own food. He never asked his men to endure anything he wouldn't endure himself. By March 1916, the ice was breaking up. Large cracks appeared in their flow. They were forced to move to a more stable ice platform, Patience Camp. But stable was relative. The ice beneath them was literally melting. On April 9, 1916, nearly 5 months after the Endurance sank, the ice floe split directly through their camp. Tents were cut in half, men scrambled to safety. It was clear the ice was no longer viable. They had to risk the boats. April 9, 1916. After 497 days on the ice, Shackleton gave the order, launch the boats. They had 3 lifeboats, James Caird, Dudley Docker, and Stancomb Wills, designed for 20 men total. They had 28 men. The boats were overloaded before they added supplies. The ocean they were about to enter, the Southern Ocean surrounding Antarctica, is the most dangerous water on Earth. Waves regularly exceed 40 feet, winds reach hurricane force, water temperature is below freezing, a man overboard dies in minutes. And they were attempting to sail these tiny boats to Elephant Island, 100 miles away. They launched on April 9th. Within hours, they were in hell. The boats wallowed in heavy seas, waves crashed over them constantly, men bailed frantically, but water accumulated faster than they could remove it. Everything was soaked, the men were soaked, no possibility of warmth or dryness. At night, temperatures dropped below zero, wet clothes froze solid, men's hands froze to the oars. Ice formed on the boats, adding weight and making them even more unstable. They had no navigation equipment beyond a compass and a sextant. Cloud cover made sun sights impossible. Shackleton navigated by dead reckoning, estimating position based on speed and direction, knowing that any error could send them past Elephant Island into the open ocean where they'd die. For 7 days, they fought the ocean. Men suffered from frostbite, dehydration, salt sores. Some showed signs of madness, the psychological strain of constant cold, wet, and exhaustion breaking them down. Shackleton rationed food and water carefully, but supplies were running desperately low. If they didn't reach land soon, they'd start dying. On April 15, 1916, 7 days after launching, a man in the bow of the James Caird shouted, "Land!" Elephant Island, a desolate mountainous rock covered in ice. No vegetation, no shelter, but it was solid ground. They landed on a narrow beach. For the first time in 497 days, 16 months, the men stood on land instead of ice or boat. Several men literally kissed the rocks, others collapsed. They were alive, they'd survived the ice in the ocean, but they weren't saved. Elephant Island was uninhabited and uninhabitable. No one lived there, no ships visited. If they waited for rescue, they'd wait forever. Shackleton assessed the situation. His men were in terrible condition, frostbitten, exhausted, some showing signs of scurvy and psychological breakdown. Supplies were nearly gone. Winter was approaching. He made the decision that would define the expedition. He would take a small crew and sail one of the lifeboats to South Georgia Island, 800 miles away, to get help. 800 miles across the Southern Ocean in a 22-foot lifeboat. It had never been done. Navigation would be nearly impossible. The seas were the worst on Earth. If they missed South Georgia, a tiny island in the vastness of the ocean, they'd sail into the Atlantic and die. But it was the only option. Shackleton chose 5 men to accompany him: Frank Worsley, navigator; Tom Crean, second officer; Timothy McCarthy, John Vincent, and Harry "Chippy" McNish, carpenter. McNish modified the James Caird, adding a makeshift deck to provide minimal protection from waves. On April 24, 1916, the James Caird launched. 22 men remained on Elephant Island under command of Frank Wild, Shackleton's second in command. Shackleton's last words to Wild: "If I don't return, you take over." Wild understood. Shackleton might not come back, and if he didn't, Wild was to keep the men alive until rescue arrived, however long that took.
The James Caird sailed from Elephant Island on April 24, 1916, carrying 6 men and minimal supplies into the worst ocean on Earth. For 16 days, they fought seas that dwarfed their tiny boat. Waves 60 feet high crashed over them. Wind tore at the makeshift deck. Water leaked through every seam. They bailed constantly, but the boat was never dry. Frank Worsley navigated using a sextant, trying to get sun sights through clouds and spray. It was nearly impossible. They had seconds to take a reading before the next wave hit. One mistake in navigation and they'd miss South Georgia entirely. The men suffered terribly. Wet clothes never dried. They had no way to heat food or water. Everything was eaten cold. Salt water soaked everything, causing painful sores. Frostbite affected fingers and toes. Sleep was impossible. They took shifts, 3 men working the boat, while 3 tried to rest in a tiny space beneath the deck, lying in inches of freezing water. On May 5, 1916, day 12, they encountered a wave unlike anything they'd seen. Shackleton, at the helm, looked up and saw a wall of water higher than any previous wave. He had time to shout a warning before it hit. The wave crashed down on the James Caird with the force of an avalanche. The boat filled completely with water. They should have capsized. They should have sunk. But the boat held. The men bailed frantically, throwing water overboard by the bucketful. Somehow, impossibly, the James Caird survived. On May 8, 1916, day 15, they saw seaweed in the water. Land birds overhead, signs of land. On May 10, 1916, after 16 days at sea covering 800 nautical miles, they sighted South Georgia Island. They'd done it. They'd crossed the Southern Ocean in a lifeboat and hit their target. Worsley's navigation had been perfect. But they weren't done. They'd landed on the south side of South Georgia. The whaling stations, civilization, rescue, were on the north side. The island was 26 miles across, covered in mountains and glaciers. No one had ever crossed it, and the James Caird was too damaged to sail around the island. They'd have to walk. May 18, 1916. After 8 days recovering from the boat journey, Shackleton chose 2 men, Worsley and Crean, to accompany him across South Georgia. The other 3 would stay with the boat, too weak to travel. They had no map, no climbing equipment, no proper food. They carried 3 days' rations and hoped it would be enough. The crossing took 36 hours of continuous walking. They navigated by moonlight, crossed glaciers and mountain passes, descended slopes by sliding down in the dark, risking death with every step. At one point, they reached a ridge and looked down a slope too steep to climb down safely, too dangerous to attempt in darkness. But stopping meant freezing to death. Shackleton made a decision. They'd slide down. Sitting, linked together, they slid 2,000 feet down an icy slope in the dark, not knowing if there was a cliff at the bottom. There wasn't. They survived. On May 20th, 1916, at 7 a.m., they heard a steam whistle from the whaling station at Stromness, the sound of civilization, the sound of rescue. They walked into Stromness covered in ice, bearded, filthy. The station manager didn't recognize them. When Shackleton identified himself, the manager stared in disbelief. Everyone thought the Endurance expedition had died years ago. Shackleton's first words, "We need to rescue my men." Immediately, Shackleton organized rescue missions. First, the 3 men left on the south side of South Georgia. A ship retrieved them within days. But the 22 men on Elephant Island were a different problem. The island was surrounded by pack ice. Multiple rescue attempts failed. Ships couldn't get through. For 4 months, Shackleton tried and failed to reach Elephant Island. He chartered ships in the Falklands, in Punta Arenas, in Uruguay. Each time, ice blocked them. Meanwhile, on Elephant Island, Frank Wild kept the men alive. He maintained routines. He rationed food. He kept morale up by assuring them Shackleton would return. Every day, Wild would say, "The boss is coming back today." Every day. On August 30th, 1916, 497 days after the Endurance sank, Shackleton finally broke through the ice aboard the Chilean ship Yelcho. He reached Elephant Island and sent a boat ashore. Wild gathered the men. "The boss is back," he said, calmly, as if Shackleton had only been gone a few hours. All 22 men were alive. Shackleton counted them as they boarded. 22. Not one lost, not one left behind. The expedition was over. The goal of crossing Antarctica unachieved. The ship lost. The plan failed. But every single man came home alive.
What made Shackleton's leadership extraordinary wasn't just survival, though the survival was miraculous. It was how he kept 28 men alive through 22 months of conditions designed to kill. He absorbed the worst stress himself. When supplies ran low, Shackleton gave his rations to weaker men. When morale was lowest, he maintained optimism. He never let the men see his own doubts or fears. He made unpopular but correct decisions. Stopping the march across the ice felt like surrender, but it saved lives. Attempting the James Caird voyage was insanely risky, but it was the only option. Shackleton made the hard calls and took responsibility. He treated every man as essential. From the ship's captain to the stowaway teenager, Shackleton made each man feel valued. He learned their names, their skills, their fears. He assigned tasks that gave everyone purpose. He controlled the narrative. Photographer Frank Hurley documented the journey. Even when things were desperate, Shackleton ensured they maintained journals and photographs. He understood that meaning in memory matter. He refused to accept casualties. From day one, Shackleton's priority wasn't the expedition's success, it was his men's survival. When the choice was between glory and safety, he chose safety every time. Business schools teach Shackleton because he embodied crisis leadership. Stay calm, make tough calls, protect your people, never give up. Shackleton returned to England in 1917 to a world that had moved on. World War I dominated everything. Millions were dying in trenches. Nobody cared about an Antarctic expedition that failed to cross the continent. But Shackleton had accomplished something more important. He'd kept his promise, every man home alive. He wrote a book about the expedition, South, that became a bestseller. Frank Hurley's photographs stunned the world. The image of the Endurance trapped in the ice, masts tilted, became iconic. Shackleton attempted one more Antarctic expedition in 1921. On January 5, 1922, he suffered a fatal heart attack aboard his ship Quest, anchored off South Georgia Island. He was 47 years old. He was buried on South Georgia, at the edge of the Antarctic he loved. His grave looks out over the ocean he crossed in a lifeboat. The men of the Endurance expedition scattered after the war. Some died in World War I. Others lived long lives, always remembering the 22 months on the ice. Perce Blackborough, the teenage stowaway, lost toes to frostbite but survived. He worked as a sailor for years, always telling people about the boss who brought them home. Frank Wild, who kept the men alive on Elephant Island, eventually moved to South Africa. When he died, his ashes were buried next to Shackleton on South Georgia. The wreck of the Endurance lay undiscovered for 107 years. In March 2022, a deep-sea expedition finally found her, 10,000 feet below the surface of the Weddell Sea, remarkably preserved in the icy water. The ship that carried them into the ice, the ship that died so they could live. Ernest Shackleton didn't achieve his goal. He didn't cross Antarctica. He lost his ship. By any objective measure, the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition was a failure. But it's remembered as one of the greatest leadership achievements in history. Why? Because Shackleton understood that the mission wasn't crossing Antarctica, the mission was bringing his men home. When the Endurance sank, he immediately shifted focus: survival. When they reached Elephant Island, he didn't celebrate, he planned the next step: rescue. Every decision, stop marching, launch the boats, attempt the James Caird voyage, cross South Georgia, was about getting his men home alive. And he did it. 28 men entered the ice, 28 men came out. Modern leadership studies obsess over Shackleton because he demonstrated principles that transcend polar exploration. Adaptability: when the original plan failed, he pivoted immediately. Resilience: he maintained optimism through 22 months of disaster. Responsibility: he never blamed his men or circumstances, he led. Sacrifice: he gave his rations, his warmth, his safety to keep others alive. Judgment: he made impossibly difficult decisions and accepted the consequences. In business, in military command, in any crisis, the question is the same. When everything goes wrong, can you bring your people through? Shackleton could. For 22 months in the most hostile environment on Earth, against impossible odds, he kept them alive, kept them together, and brought them home. Not one life lost, not one man left behind. That's not just survival. That's leadership.
The Antarctic is still there, still lethal. Modern expeditions with satellites, radios, and supply drops still lose people. The cold doesn't care about technology. Shackleton had none of that. No radio, no GPS, no rescue. Just 28 men, 3 boats, and a leader who refused to let them die. When you visit his grave on South Georgia, you can see Elephant Island in the distance, the rock where 22 men waited 4 months for rescue that might never come. You can imagine the James Caird, 22 feet long, 6 men, 800 miles of the worst ocean on Earth. You can picture the Endurance, trapped in ice, slowly dying while her crew watched. And you can understand why Ernest Shackleton is remembered not for crossing Antarctica, but for something harder: keeping an impossible promise. I will bring every man home alive. 22 months, 28 men, 0 deaths. Sometimes the greatest achievement isn't reaching the destination, it's refusing to lose anyone on the way.